Hello and welcome. There are many titles that seem to only exist on dusty shelves of a comic store, or are frequently seen in dollar bins. Independent darlings like Cerebus, Bone, and Love and Rockets might not fit this definition, but Poison Elves and Hepcats do. Some are well regarded, like American Flag and Concrete, but they never seem to be discussed. For the majority, they are simply overlooked. So let's go to that dusty shelf and see what exists there. The forthcoming list reflects my reading habits and my taste. However, I try to incorporate a variety of titles with different types of stories. This way a lot of independent flavors are represented. These are not in-depth reviews. I'm going for quantity over quality. I'll mention a few details and why each series is worth a read. Finally, this is not a comprehensive list. In fact, I could easily make this a multi-part series if there's a demand for it. But for now, there will be enough suggestions to keep you busy for a little while. Okay, let's get into it. Kane by Paul Grist is a highly involved crime story with numerous overlapping elements. Seriously, Grist does not get enough credit for writing stories that look basic and cartoony, but have so much depth. The series focuses on and around the title character, Kane, a detective in the fictional location of New Eden. The majority of the story takes place in the present as Kane deals with various crimes. But there's a fractured ongoing backstory concerning why Kane killed his partner. Finally, there's the crime lord and antagonist, Oscar Dark, whose influence is all over New Eden. While it is quite serious, it never gets too dark and grim. There are some very whimsical moments that arise. In particular, a story involving a grown man in a bunny suit being pursued by let's call it a homage to Marv from Sin City. In fact, that surreal episode collides with two other stories and ties them together perfectly. It's some marvelous storytelling. Overall, it's a great crime series with some well-developed characters in an equally interesting setting. Perhaps the easiest description of mind management is to call it a realistic version of the X-Men, mixed with the paranoid conspiracy foundation of the Department of Truth. It includes a detailed history of the 20th century, seen from a different perspective, but the majority of the story focuses on Meru, the only survivor of a tragic event in Zanzibar. The level of detail, given in very precise chunks, is quite astounding. There is a lot to take in, and it is presented very well. Even the presentation, the literal pages it's printed on, has a relevance to the overall story. Unlike something similar, specifically The Invisibles, these elements are mainly flavor text. It's fine if you don't pause and read all the material in the margins. You're not going to feel lost if you don't take in and consider every detail. In fact, I might suggest its intent is to distract you at points, or to act as self-aware subliminal suggestions. Overall, mind management is about how that organization fell apart and the forces that are working to put it back together again. Again, like the X-Men, there is one faction that seems righteous and another with dubious motivations. However, there are a lot of morally gray areas on both sides, so it's not a simple matter of good versus evil. It's more nuanced than that. The ending may be a bit shaky, but it's a very solid series otherwise. In recent years, Charles Burns has attained a certain well-deserved status as a respectable graphic novelist. His voice is definitely unique and accessible, although his work looks dark and mysterious with an unsettling edge. Black Hole may be the personification of what Burns does best. The story itself can be reduced to a coming-of-age tale, with a group of high schoolers discovering and exploring their sexuality. This exploration, this transition from adolescence to adulthood, takes on a physical manifestation. It's unpredictable, and for some, the results are plain to see. They become outcasts for experiencing nothing more than a natural component of growing up. In part, it's the justified paranoia concerning sexually transmitted infections, and how those that are infected are treated like disgusting animals. Another interpretation is these manifestations reflect how the individual feels after that transformative experience involving something that will be an ongoing, constant part of their lives moving forward. It's a story everyone can identify with, even though some elements may be exaggerated for dramatic effect. There is a distinct humanity at the core of the inhuman, surface-level details. Even though the story can be easily encapsulated, the interpretations are intentionally open for everyone to draw their own conclusions through their own experiences from that time. ElfQuest is an epic fantasy story with a lot of science fiction elements. It is a pivotal title from the independent scene from the 70s. Its influence may be subtle, but it is present in many fantasy-related titles, and it may be the first North American title that took inspiration from manga, especially in the artwork. What is the series about? Well, the title sort of gives it away. It's a quest undertaken by a clan of elves. It focuses on one group that are displaced from their forest home by humans. This group wanders until they stumble upon another group of elves living on the edge of a desert. This surprises all the elves, because both distinct groups believe they are the only elves in existence. From there, they decide to travel far and wide and unite all the disparate elven clans that may exist on this world. It's also surprisingly sex-positive, with a subtle emphasis on polyamory. This element is in the background though. Its focus isn't on exploring that area of relationships. For the most part, this is a very evenly paced series. For something that seems like a massive epic, it really does move along fairly well and doesn't linger too long and overstay its welcome. It's not a deep story with analogies and metaphors, but it is a rich story that is satisfying in its own manner. There are a lot of side stories that fill in the mythology, many of which weren't produced by the core creator, Wendy Pini. They are fine additions, but the main storyline, which is split into various miniseries by Pini, is the essential part of the saga. The easiest way to describe Strangehaven is to compare it to 3 TV series. The first would be Twin Peaks, the second would be The Prisoner, and the third would be Lost. The largest influence may be Twin Peaks, since Strangehaven is mostly about quirky, unique characters in a small English village in the middle of nowhere. Comparisons to The Prisoner and Lost are somewhat slight. It has the tone of The Prisoner, since the characters all live in a village they cannot leave, which also evokes Lost and the current series, From. At the same time, no one seems too bothered by this fact, so it's an element that sits in the background. The strength of Strangehaven is its characters, all of which have their own voice and internal life. I can't think of one character within the series that feels incomplete. They all feel quite real and developed, with a point of view and a reasonable motivation to their actions. Furthermore, the story progresses through organic interaction and dialogue between the characters, and none of it feels forced or cheap. Unfortunately, the series is incomplete, and there are many dangling questions that need an answer. That said, what is available is worth reading. It's a hidden gem of a series that is quite unique. In the early 2000s, following the tragic events in September 2001, there was no shortage of material exploring counterintelligence and the response to terrorism. Queen and Country, an Eisner Award-winning series by Greg Rucka and various artists, is one of the more interesting titles in that genre. The setting is a British spy agency doing its best to navigate the changing landscape of the 21st century. There is, of course, the foreign threats that require immediate attention, and there is the domestic bureaucracy that makes work of this nature politically sensitive. Everyone wants the work to be done. It's seen as an essential part to maintain a certain standard of living in the first world. But due to foreign relations with various countries with various agendas, no one wants to take accountability for that dirty work. According to Rucka, the comic was heavily inspired by the classic British TV series, The Sandbaggers. For anyone familiar with that series, the approach to personal relationships, the maneuvering for power, and the grounded repercussions of the job are all common elements in this comic. It's not a simple ongoing story about bad guys being taken out by smiling, sardonic spies in tailored suits. It's about the repercussions that follow an incident of foreign murder and espionage. There are ripples, both small and large, that have to be managed or eliminated. Saucer Country by Paul Cornell and Ryan Kelly is one of the very few Vertigo titles that was cancelled and then resurrected at another publisher, where it was cancelled once again. Thanks to crowdfunding, Cornell and Kelly managed to bring this series to an ending, which is one reason why I'm including it on this list. The series heavily focused on UFO mythology, and this is integrated into a modern presidential election. It is, at its core, a deep state conspiracy story with a reasonably grounded explanation for all that happens. For anyone who is interested in UFOs and aliens, the complete Saucer Country contains many details and references to classic UFO legends. Like the X-Files, there is a balance between the surreal nature of aliens on Earth and real explanations to explain certain associated phenomenon. It is smart and amusing, and a series that deserved a much longer, much better fate. That said, it is complete and worth a read. Gregory Gallant, better known as Seth, is a Canadian cartoonist who emerged on the comic scene around the same time as Chester Brown and Joe Matt, all of whom became friends and influenced one another's work. Of the three, Seth's work is possibly the most well-known, with Chester Brown being a close second. Regardless, the aforementioned influence of Brown and Matt is seen in early issues of Palooka-ville. This culminates in the sublime look at cartooning, with the serialized graphic novel, It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken. It is autobiographical, but it has been fictionalized to a degree. It's during this story that Seth's style fully emerges and evokes a sense of nostalgia for simpler times that have long passed. From there, Palooka-ville drops the pretense of being an autobiographical comic and mainly focuses on stories about the effect of modern times on those simpler times. That may be a simplification, but there's definitely a sense of wry, disappointed nostalgia in the remainder of the series. Seth is certainly an outsider who managed to find his niche, and he has thrived ever since. His work appeals to anyone with an outsider, slightly misanthropic streak who knows they just don't fit into any category. For anyone who feels displaced in society, Palooka-ville will be a place that feels like home. Ice Cream Man is a difficult series to summarize, mainly because it's a series of short stories with a thematic similarity. The easiest, most direct explanation would be to call these surreal, existential horror stories. For the most part, the settings are quiet suburbs with a contemporary setting, featuring characters experiencing some form of crisis. Although there are a few stories that take place in the distant past and in the distant future. It definitely creates its own reality, with its own internal logic that's unique to the character or situation that's being explored. Basically, it's a unique series. It's not simply one thing or another. It's a lot of similar, related things, all of which are interesting. However, at this point in its run, it may be time for things to wrap up and expose the mythology and conclude the ongoing narrative about the title character, because it's not a concept that can carry on forever. Lopper, written and illustrated by Andrew MacLean, is an interesting take on the sword and sandals genre. While I've not read the entire series, it's an enjoyable action tale about a man with a big sword and a malicious severed head as a companion. They travel the world, fulfilling quests, and encountering a fair amount of weirdness. The artwork is superb and expressive, with a color palette not ordinarily used for stories of this nature. It's too bright and too cartoony, yet it works perfectly to give it an epic animated adventure flavor. This offsets the excessive violence of the story, since the title character does live up to his name, frequently. However, it doesn't feel gratuitous or distasteful. It's merely an aspect of this character's purpose. There may not be an underlying epic story, but there is a mythology that is developing. There you go, those are 10 independent titles that should keep you busy reading for a little while. Feel free to leave your suggestions in the comments below. Thanks to all my fine supporters on Patreon and YouTube. Your ongoing support makes it possible for this channel to continue. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so very, very much. Extra special thanks to Eidolon, Constant Disappointment Records, Jeff Nicholson, Sickin, Francis De La Cruz, Chris Malloy, John Nyukes, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Ruby St. Dennis, Phil Sagan, Edward Clayton Andrews, Corey Drew, L.S. Gregor, Brian Deaton, Tom Granis, James Graham, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient. Until next time.